All right, good afternoon. My name is Fred Bowen, and I am the author of 23 kids' sports books for kids ages 7 to 12, and I also write a weekly kids' sports column for the Kids Post page of the Washington Post, which is a charter sponsor of the National Book Festival. And before I introduce our next speaker, first we should have a word of thanks for the co-chairman of the festival, David Rubenstein, and the other generous sponsors who made this event possible. If you'd like to add your financial support to the National Book Festival, a way to do it is in the program at the back, and it would certainly be a great way to support things. By the way, after our next author's presentation, there will be questions and answers, and if you would please step up to the two mics that you see there. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce Suzanne Slade. Suzanne Slade is an award-winning author of more than 100 books. I thought I was doing great with 23. She has more than 100. Most of the books are about science, and that's probably because Suzanne was a mechanical engineer who actually worked on rockets. Her latest book is called Countdown, 2,979 Days to the Moon. And it is the story of the U.S. space program from the President Kennedy announcement that we were going to go to the moon until we stepped onto the moon. It is a fabulous book. I have seen it. She will be signing the book at 4:30 after this at booth 20. It has already gotten starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, from Booklist, but most of Suzanne's books get starred reviews. She is a wonderful author. And so without further ado, let's have a big round of applause for Suzanne Slade.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'm so excited to be at the National Book Festival to celebrate reading and books. And, of course, my book, Countdown, which is illustrated by New York Times best-selling illustrator Thomas Gonzalez. Now, this book covers 2,979 incredible days from when Kennedy announced we should land a man on the moon by the end of this decade, which you'll hear in his own words. He's saying that. He's saying, we'll land a man on this moon, but
of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Excellent. Until Neil Armstrong's first step on the moon.
I believe.
Oh, there we go. So what I wanted to do with this book, with Apollo, is I wanted to share not only the successes of those early missions, but also a lot of the struggles and the surprises that happened in those early Apollo missions that not many people are aware of, because they led to the most historic, one of the most historic events in history, the first moon landing.
2, 1, 0. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
For the moment, man on the way to the moon. It seemed that the whole world stopped as man set out on the adventure to escape from his own planet and to set foot on a distant one.
So just a little background, as Fred said, I'm a mechanical engineer, and I had worked at McDonnell Douglas Space Systems in California, and some of the spacecraft I worked on were the Titan and Delta rockets and the Delta Star spacecraft. So I do have a big personal interest in space travel. So I thought it would be fun today to do something a little interactive, that I could give you an Apollo quiz, which will help you test your knowledge of these early Apollo missions that led to the big landing, and also you can learn something new. So are you ready for the quiz? All right. Question 1. The very first Apollo mission, Apollo 1, was a huge success, a national disaster, or delayed for years? What do you think? I've got a gentleman here. What do you think, sir? He thinks it was a huge success. But unfortunately, it was in fact a national disaster that almost ended the entire Apollo program. That very first mission, just a few weeks before they were to launch in January of '67, there was a fire on the launch pad while they were just doing routine testing. They weren't even trying to launch. And that fire killed all 3 of the Apollo 1 astronauts. And at that time, after that disaster, the nation started to think, do we really want to try to go to the moon? And no one was sure if the Apollo mission would continue, but they decided it would. So NASA grounded Apollo 2 and 3 because those spacecraft were the same as the one that burned up. So they had to check out what was wrong. They redesigned the command module, and then the world then nervously watched while Apollo 4 launched. So another question, what do you think? Did it launch with no crew, 3 astronauts, or a chimpanzee? And while you think about your answer, you can watch the launch.
Ignition sequence starts. 5, 4, we have ignition. All engines are running. We have liftoff. We have liftoff at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
All right. I have a gentleman right here that would like to give me an answer. What do you think? He thinks C, a chimpanzee. That's a very good guess. But, okay, now how do I go back? No crew. It was actually no crew. So what they did, just to be safe, on the next 3 missions,
ignition sequence.
4, 5, and 6, they all went unmanned. They could test the spacecraft. They could test their flight plans. Apollo, they wanted to make sure there was not another accident like they had on that first mission. So question 3, then on Apollo 7 was the first manned mission. It orbited Earth 163 times successfully. But this crew staged a mutiny when they refused to eat dried spinach, wear helmets to land, or go to bed at 11. What do we think? They were, we have a guess. Yes, dear? She thinks B, wear helmets. We've got a very smart young girl here. In fact, they did refuse to wear the helmets, and they were not worried about having helmet hair when they landed and the press was there. That was not the concern. They all had developed bad colds while they were in flight. And when you're up in space where there's very little gravity, your sinuses can't drain, and it was a matter of safety. They were worried if their helmets were on and they couldn't clear their noses and their sinuses, they might choke. But Mission Control was not happy about this at all. There were some harsh words exchanged, which I read in the transcript, and then none of those astronauts ever flew another Apollo mission because of their mutiny. Okay, question 4. Apollo 8 was the first crew to orbit the moon. And during one telecast, Jim Lovell, you probably remember him maybe from Apollo 13, which is later, Jim Lovell demonstrated how astronauts exercise, make chocolate pudding, or navigate in space. Yes, sir? He thinks how they exercise, which they do exercise in space, but in fact, Jim made up a bag of chocolate pudding. And he telecast this. This was halfway on their way to the moon. You'll be able to see this footage. It's a little old, so it's grainy, but you'll see him with his chocolate pudding float by.
Jim is making a journey and making up a bag of chocolate pudding. Getting some floating by.
Another cool thing about this mission was this crew was the first to see an Earthrise, which is the Earth rising above the surface of the moon. And they got that beautiful picture to share with us Earthlings. So question 5. Now we're up to Apollo 9. And they had a lunar module which they named spider, which if you look at it, it kind of does a little bit like a spider. But it flew like a dream. But the crew did have problems with, do you think, low batteries, motion sickness, or losing things in their ship? Yes, dear. She thinks they had problems with batteries. In fact, it was the other two items. They had trouble with motion sickness and losing things in their ship. One of the astronauts, Rusty Schweikert, became very ill, and they weren't even sure if he was going to be able to do his spacewalk, but he was able to do it. And also, the crew kept losing toothbrushes, food bags. So they learned two things. They need to Velcro their items in place so they don't float around the cabin and get lost. And they learned that vomit droplets are hard to catch because once things are free, you know, it was a smelly, messy ordeal from what I read. Okay, question 6. We're up to Apollo 10. This is the mission before America's going to attempt to land. So they had the crucial job, they had to scout the landing location where Apollo 11 would attempt to land. So when they were done with their work to relax, they liked to listen to this song. Do you think it was Fly Me to the Moon, Space Cowboy, or Moon Dance? Yes, dear. She thinks Fly Me to the Moon, and she is right. Oh, and look at the ancient technology. Anybody remember the cassette player for, it was some ancient technology they had on board. Yes, it was Fly Me to the Moon, and the ironic thing about that was that this mission, these people flew closer to the moon than any human had ever been. They were, in fact, 9 miles from the surface of the moon. Okay, finally, Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong has landed. So how many people do you think watched Neil Armstrong take that first historic step on the moon on live TV? Yes, sir. He said a lot. Our choices are 2 million, 100 million, or 600 million. He's guessing 100. That's very good. But in fact, oh,
Go for landing, over. Roger, understand. Go for landing. 30 feet, 2.5 down. We're drifting to the right, low. 30 seconds.
Oh, jeez.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
We're home. Man on the moon. Boy.
Wait, we're going to be busy for a minute.
There he is. There's a foot coming down the step.
At the foot of the ladder.
Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon on this July 20th, 1969.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
quite a historic day. And guess what? People around the world stopped whatever they were doing to see that first man on the moon. We have people, thousands of people in New York Central Park gathered to watch it on a large screen. Up in the top corner, you see a business in Italy where people just stopped work and gathered around a TV. An airport in Sydney, it didn't matter where they were going. They wanted to stop and see that a man was actually on the moon. And of course, homes around the world, people had parties. They had moon landing parties, and everyone hoped it would end up being a good party, and they would land and they would survive when they stepped out on the moon. Okay, this is our last question. So once the Apollo 11 astronauts returned home, they were quarantined to protect the world from moon germs, because doctors didn't know if there were viruses or germs on the moon that could bring home an infection that would wipe out our entire planet. So here you see the crew is being greeted by President Nixon from behind glass. So how long do you think they quarantined the astronauts? 24 hours, 7 days, or 21 days? Yes. She said 7 days. That's a great guess, but they were a little nervous. They wanted to be sure. So in fact, they quarantined them for 21 days. And then after that, They celebrated. Everyone celebrated.
What was it we were really celebrating? 3 men who had done what no man before had done? A technological feat was believed beyond the realm of possibility? The fulfillment of an age-old dream? Were we celebrating simply because it had been a long time since we'd had anything to celebrate? Or was this something that touched an irrational, unthinking instinct in us all?
So the celebration included parades in major cities like New York and Chicago. There you also see the astronauts and their wives being invited to state dinners. The entire world joined together and could celebrate together because of this incredible feat that most people, quite frankly, didn't think was possible. So just a little background, I began Countdown in the fall of 2009. This was shortly after the 40th anniversary of the first moon landing. And I thought I would like to create a special book in time for the 50th anniversary, which will be this coming July of 2019. So ironically, as I look back, it took about 2,979 days for me to create this book, which is a little over 8 years. Now, as a writer, what happens is there are often several stages that you go through. And the first stage, when I first get a book idea, I am very excited. And I think this is going to be awesome. I can't wait to dig into research. This is going to be fun. But as the days, weeks, months, and years go on, as a writer, especially of nonfiction, you hit a lot of times that you get frustrated. Sometimes you hit roadblocks. I get tired, the fact-checking. So there are many stages that I went through until the book was finished, but I'm very excited. Today is the day the book releases, coincidentally enough. Thank you. And I'm very excited about it because I want to share. There's so much interesting history here that I feel young readers and older readers don't realize. And I really think you'll be fascinated to read about this time in history. As I mentioned, research was really one of the most fascinating steps. And I got to do some exciting things, something I never thought I would be able to do. For instance, I interviewed Alan Bean. He was the 4th man on the moon. He was on the Apollo 12 mission, the mission right after the first landing. And he was kind enough to allow me to do a couple interviews with him. I also, of course, looked through the NASA transcripts, which any of you can look. They're online. You can read every word that the astronauts and mission control shared. I looked at the Apollo photo archives. I emailed with Walter Cunningham, Apollo 7, which was interesting because his emails, he's in his 80s, so his emails come back in a very big font, in short, yes, no. But it was the information I needed. So that it was just really fun to research this book. Meanwhile, once the publisher, Peachtree Publishers, picked up the book, my fabulous illustrator, Tom Gonzalez, was doing research of his own, was making sketches. He will make changes as we go along, and then painting his final art, which is absolutely gorgeous. His work is just stunning in this book. So as I mentioned, Countdown releases today, so I can't think of a better place to celebrate than with fellow book lovers like you here at the National Book Festival. It is 144 pages long. It's for ages 10 and up. It's technically a middle grade. It's in free verse, so it makes it easy for reluctant readers as well. There's 54 illustrations, and I'm just very excited to share it with readers. So I just thought I'd see if you have any questions you'd like to ask me. I would love to answer any questions. It could be about research or the Apollo missions or writing, whatever you're interested in.
I have one question. Who was filming? Because if it was the first step, I just wonder who was filming into the rocket.
You are a very, who's filming him taking the first step on the moon, right? Sharp, very good question. So NASA had thought ahead, right? And they knew everyone would want to see this. So they had put a special camera on the outside of the lunar module. And the lunar module is the spacecraft that lands on the moon. So once they landed, they could pop the camera out. Now, as you saw the footage, it was kind of grainy. It wasn't high quality. But that's how they were able to have that camera film him as Armstrong went out and took his first step. Great question.
Would you ever like to go to the moon?
Someone help me with that question?
I think she asked if you want to go to the moon.
If I want to go to the moon. You know, I really like looking at all the pictures of the moon, but I don't think I'm quite brave enough to want to go. Because every time an astronaut went, and actually 12 people landed on the moon, but you never know if you were going to make it. So maybe I'm not that brave, but I'd like to read about it. Thank you.
Are you planning on writing any more books?
Am I planning on writing any more? Yes, I actually have 7 other books that are in the works with other publishers. So if you're interested in the moon landing, this countdown book, in March I have a book coming out called The Daring Dozen. Because as I mentioned, 12 people have been on the moon. So that book is for a little younger readers, and it talks about what they did on their missions and what they found on the moon. And I've got another book coming up in March called A Computer Called Catherine. And it's about Katherine Johnson, who was a human computer who helped plot the trajectories for all of these, for many missions.
I'm going to still think about it.
Thank you.
How many Apollo missions have there been?
There have been 17 Apollo missions, but as I mentioned, Apollo 2 and 3 were scrubbed, and then 4, 5, and 6 were unmanned, but 17 is our total.
What did it feel like reading the book? I mean, making the book.
What do I feel like making the book? You know what? I'll tell you, I feel at the beginning, I feel, yoo-hoo, I'm going to make a book. And then I get researching and working, and I'm going, oh, wow, this is really hard. This is harder than I thought. I don't know if I can do it. You ever feel like that sometimes? But then I keep working, and I keep working, and then I get the feelings of being tired and excited about research. So lots of feelings go into making a book. Thank you.
When you were younger, was science your favorite subject?
Yes, in fact, science and math were my favorite subjects. And can I tell you a secret you won't tell my publisher? Okay, writing was my least favorite subject in school. It was, but I was a huge reader. I joined my summer reading club at my library every summer, and I read lots and lots of books. And reading helps you become a better writer. So I think it was key that I kept reading.
How did you guys know how much food that you needed on the trip?
You mean the trip to the moon? Great question. Well, they had nutritionists, and those are people who study about food, who work to package all the meals for the astronauts. And they were all packaged, each astronaut had a color, I believe, of the bags that would have their food. And they knew at this meal, this is exactly what I'm eating. So they planned out the calories and how much nutrition they would need. And they would add water to the food before they ate it. Great question.
If you could go to the moon, what would you bring with you?
Gosh, I don't know, but you know what? You remind me of something that Alan Bean, remember I said I interviewed the 4th man on the moon? And he said he had one regret about his mission, and that was he wished he had taken a football to the moon because he wanted to throw the longest pass in the universe. Because on the moon, there's 1/6 of the gravity that we have on Earth, and there's no air. So if you could throw a football, it would have gone for forever. So, thank you.
How long did it take to land on the moon?
How long did it take to land? That's a great question because actually, on the lunar module, the thing that was going to land, they only put in just enough fuel to land. So once they took off to land, they had to land quickly. And so it got very tense as Apollo 11 was landing. They were almost out of fuel. So that it didn't take long at all for them to find their spot and land. Great question.
How long have you been writing books?
I've been writing books for about 22 years, but guess what? It took 8 years to get my first book published. For 8 years, when I mail my story to the publishers, the people who make the books, all I heard back from them was, no thank you, we don't want to publish your book. And that's called a rejection letter. So I had to be persistent, and I had a lot to learn about writing because I was an engineer, so I had to learn a lot. But I'm glad that I stuck with it. So last thing I want to say before I leave, for you kids who when you try something new and when you first do it, maybe you're not really good at it, maybe soccer or playing a new instrument, but if you love it, keep at it, because the more you practice, the better you'll get, which is exactly what happened with me in writing. So, well, thank you. I've been told we're out of time, but thank you for being such a wonderful audience. And if you want to sign my book or meet with me, I'll be 4:30 to 5:30 in the signing area. Thank you.